Hello, my name is Charlie Irvine. I'm the Managing Director of Questions of Difference. I'd like to take a few moments to tell you about a concept that we've been working with for a number of years, called the concept of assumptions. Now, the notion of assumptions is nothing particularly new. What is new is how we start to think about and use them to transform the conversations we have in organizations and how we work together as people. It's a bit like the assumption that we make that the best way for people to improve is to tell them their mistakes. So we're very focused on it, and we know exactly the detail. But we know from another concept called the 70-30 that one's learning curve, if you focus on what's working, escalates to a rate of learning of 70%, from a 30% rate of learning from mistakes. And yet, as a society, we still hold this profound assumption that learning from mistakes is the most effective thing to do. So, talking about society, where do our assumptions come from? And how do we form them? Well, as we know, assumptions come from a whole host of things. They come from beliefs. They come from our families. They come from our societies. They come from our experiences. So a whole range of things configure together to create the assumptions that we hold. When we talk to people about assumptions, they will say, assumptions. Well, if you hold those, they will make an idiot out of you and me. I've heard that so many times. And what it's followed by is a very quick assertion. Yes, well, I try not to hold assumptions. Well, you're either Superman or superhuman. Because holding assumptions is profoundly human. We do it, we need it. It's a shorthand to life. Assumptions are the oil of our conversations and our communications with others. The challenge for us is to make sure that the assumptions we hold help us, and to pay attention at those times when the assumptions hinder us. So, how do they help us? Well, when I wake up in the morning, I make a whole host of assumptions about my alarm going off, about the coffee machine working, the trains working, my son getting his act together on time. All of those things enable me to sleep well the night before. If I didn't hold those assumptions, my guess is I wouldn't have very many calm nights. So assumptions are useful shorthands, but also they can profoundly drive our behaviors. I was so reminded of a time that I took my son on a train trip. He loves the train, and we were off to one of his favorite places, which is a farm in East Yorkshire. And as we got towards the train, we saw a conductor, and he looked very busy and very, very stern. In fact, he was a bit like the fat controller that I seem to remember from Thomas the Tank Engine. And my son said, "Let's ask him, Daddy, let's see where the driver sits." And of course one wants to do everything that your child desires. And I thought, we better not ask him. He's looking awfully grum. But we asked him. And guess what happened? He swept my son up into his arms, popped him up into the driver's compartment, and let him see what was going on in the front of the train where the driver sat. I was so amazed at the behavior of this conductor that when we got to the other side, I went to the ticket office and asked for a feedback form. And what did they give me? A complaint form. I said, no, I'm not making a complaint. I want to give some feedback. Well, I'm sorry, sir. That's the only form we have. So I crossed out the complaint and I wrote about our experience. And a few weeks later, we got a letter back from the manager saying, "Thank you so much for that feedback. I was amazed. We never get feedback like that." Now there's a surprise. If our assumption as an organization is the only thing you want to do is complain about us, guess what? That's all you're going to hear. Now, we have to ask ourselves the question, if they can be helpful and unhelpful, can we change them? The good news is we can. The not so good news is it's very difficult to change some of our assumptions, because the ones we most need to change are more often than not the ones that we hold to be most true. It's a bit like the assumption people can develop about neighbors. Our neighbors park in our driveways purposefully to obstruct us. And we know that's the truth, and that's what we hold on to. So when thinking about assumptions, one of the biggest challenges for us is to try and notice the assumptions that are stopping us do brilliant work, and start thinking about the assumptions that could help us. Let's think about a manager that you work often with, and your assumption is they really don't want to hear you, they really think you're a waste of space, and really giving you any time is a very, very difficult thing. How likely are you to be going in your fabulous, charismatic self? I very much doubt it. But if your assumption is that you've got brilliant things to bring him, then I think the conversation would go very differently. So, how do we practically use this concept of assumptions? For individuals, you might want to think about the example I've just given you. What are the assumptions you're holding about some individuals that if you could just change one of those assumptions would change the way you work with the person? What about teams? You sit in meetings. The number of meetings that I've been part of where people never ask, what's our assumption about our role here? What's our assumption about what a good meeting is? Worse still, we don't even discover what our assumption is of what we're trying to do. And then, surprise, surprise, we have conversations at cross purposes and we land up creating more and more elephants in the organization. So our challenge to you to really play with this concept of assumptions is to try and think about what are the assumptions that are helpful to you? What are the assumptions that maybe are really unhelpful? Most importantly, what might be one or two assumptions that if you made that up and held it closely, cuddled up to it, would enable you to be your brilliant, fun, playful self every day. Enjoy.